Greetings and welcome back to Room 303 and our chats with Emily, as we are calling our readings through the poetry of Emily Dickinson, the poems contained in the Johnson edition. We turn now to poem 146, On Such a Night or Such a Night. This is a poem that in 1891 was in fact titled, as it was published, Going. Of course, Emily had nothing to do with that title. It is, of course, a useful title. This is one of those poems that will be for us difficult to read. It is a sad poem, there's no doubt about it. We're back to the notion of the death of a child. We're back to the question of theodicy. In fact, we often will frame the question of theodicy, as we talked about in our introductory lecture, as being a mother in a hospital. Her child is dying of a terrible cancer, and you walk into the room to say to that mother, I'm so sorry that your child is in this horrific pain and suffering. And the mother says, I know, it's terrible. I wish that there was an all-powerful God that could somehow cure my daughter's cancer. And you say, oh, there is an all-powerful deity, God. And she reports back with incredulity, well, that must not be a very loving or kind God. And you say, no. The same God who is all-powerful and capable of healing your daughter's terrible suffering is also an all-loving deity that wants nothing more than your daughter to be cured of her cancer, which obviously leaves the mother now to only ask one more question. It is the question of theodicy, it is the question of Milton's Paradise Lost, and it is the question of poem 146 as well. The mother obviously asks, if there is an all-powerful, all-loving deity who could cure my daughter's cancer and wants nothing more than to cure my daughter's cancer, then can you please explain to me why my daughter is dying of cancer? That is the question of theodicy. It is, of course, the question in the biblical corpus of the book of Job. And obviously, it's one of the oldest questions in the history of human thought. And no doubt, it's one that we're going to grapple with right here, right now. Now, in some ways, we're back to poem 141. You'll remember in that discussion, and our assumptions are that you've been following our stuff at learnstrong.net. Down that left-hand side, our playlist is chats with Emily. And you'll remember in poem 141 that we suggested that there was some powerful research that's been done on infant mortality under the age of 5. That is to say, for every 1,000 births, 462, it is now estimated, would die in the year 1800. So, guys, we take a lot of this for granted. We take for granted that you're sitting here right now and that you made it through the experience of the first 5 years of your life. In Emily's time, and we commented on this in the biographic information that we provided in the introductory set of comments, I'm hopeful that you've already seen, that Emily herself was exposed to the loss of children, and for her, it was deeply disturbing. Now, some have read this as Emily potentially imagining her own death. Some have seen this as, in fact, Emily's comments on the inability for her to ever gain readership and to be ignored. You'll see what I mean when we get into this. It is a poem that builds off of its repetitions and its use of the word little. I was going to say enjoy this poem. You can't enjoy a poem like this. You can just marvel at it. On such a night, or such a night, would anybody care if such a little figure slipped quiet from its chair? So quiet, oh, how quiet, that nobody might know, but that the little figure rocked softer to and fro. On such a dawn, or such a dawn, would anybody sigh that such a little figure too sound asleep did lie, for Translator to waken, or stirring house below, or giddy bird in orchard, or early task to do? There was a little figure plump for every little knoll, busy needles and spools of thread and trudging feet from school, playmates and holidays and nuts and visions vast and small. Strange that the feet so precious charged should reach so small a goal. And of course, with that exclamation point at the end of this poem, that in fact makes it even a more demanding theodicy. The question of why must this happen? Why must children die? It of course is always going to be, one of the most difficult questions to try to grapple with. And here, notice, we will have the use of the word little 5 times in this poem. We commented that Emily, in 172 of her poems, will reference this word little. Notice the repetition, on such a night or such a night. In other words, it can happen all the time. Would anybody care? And this is now a question, which will receive its question mark quite a bit further down in the poem, right? Would anybody care if such a little figure slipped quiet from its chair? Notice the use of verbs and as well adverbs here, as well as adjectives. It's a brilliantly constructed poem. Would anybody even care? In other words, the argument she seems to be making is that we live with this happening so much that it's almost as if nobody seems to have the capacity to really be moved by the death of a child anymore. Then we go to so quiet, and then the dash. Oh, how quiet. By the way, you'll remember this construction of O of Emily's 5 times in the first poem. 72 poems she plays this game of this use of O. And it is, I think, a very American kind of parlance. It's like, like that. So quiet. Oh, how quiet. That nobody might know. Now, of course, the famous I'm Nobody, Who Are You poem comes to mind. Obviously, Odysseus is playing with Polyphemus on the island of the Cyclops when he's asked who he is and he says, I'm nobody, comes to mind here as well. That nobody might know. In other words, the child passes in the night. It's as if nobody even knows. Again, some have read this as Emily herself, who is the writer that nobody knows, and she herself would pass and nobody would recognize that it was an important passing of an important poet. That nobody might know, but that the little figure, and again we're back to this use of the word little, that the little figure rocked softer to and fro, right? This go from quiet to softer. And then the repetition, on such a dawn or such a dawn. Would anybody sigh? Notice we go from caring to quiet to sigh. That such a little figure, we're back to that phrase, that such a little figure too sound asleep did lie. And of course, lie and die obviously rhyme, don't they, right? For Translator, we saw this in poem 140 when she was talking about the rooster. For Translator, to wake it, or notice repetition of 3 oars, or stirring house below, or giddy bird in orchard, or early task to do. In other words, the child has gone and no one is even aware of its passing. And then she makes comment about the passing of this child. There was a little figure plump, again back to the use of the word little, for every little knoll, busy needles and spools of thread and trudging feet from school. It's interesting, this word trudging, right? Reminds us that with every death of every child, there's the loss of all of the other things that would have happened if the child could have lived on into the 2nd or the 3rd 5-year segment of its life. And then the use of the word playmates. We saw this word in poem 53 already. We'll see it again in poem 153 and as well 1549 and 1558. Playmates and holidays and nuts. She's showing us all the things that are missing when a child can't survive the early years. And visions vast and small, from little to small. In 77 poems, Emily loves this word small. Small. And then, it's an interesting word, strange. I want you to pay attention to her use of this word. It's used a number of times in her poetry. We've already seen it in poem 74 earlier. Strange. Not sad, notice, but strange. Strange that the feet so precious charged. And I think precious is the key word in this poem. It loads this poem to make this poem even that much more sad to read. Strange that the feet so precious charged should reach so small a goal. Exclamation point. Now, there are readers of this poem who will say that Emily's tone here is not just sad, not just emotively powerful, but actually it is in some ways accusatory. That's the whole point of the exclamation point. In other words, why would deity allow this kind of thing to happen? The theodicy question. At 2a, I think the point here is that she is making for sure is that the death of a child is without question one of the most tragic of all deaths. At 2b, I love the repetition, little 5 times, small 2 times, on such a construction 2 times. At 3a, well, obviously, we can think about poem 141 and the way in which poem 141 played a very similar kind of game. Some too fragile for winter winds, the thoughtful grave encloses, tenderly tucking them in from frost beneath before their feet are cold. Never the treasures in her nest the cautious grave exposes, building where schoolboy dare not look and sportsman is not bold. This covert have all the children, early aged and often cold, sparrows unnoticed by the father, lambs for whom time had not a fold. Interesting, poem 141 does not end with exclamation point. Guys, this is one of the reasons why we read these poems in successive order, so that we're capable of recognizing the connections between them, and I'm hopeful that you're doing that. Of course, at 3a, obviously Milton's Paradise Lost comes to mind. You'll remember those opening lines, the goal is to justify the ways of God to men. And of course, Milton, and we've given full lectures at learnstrong.net over that entire poem, in each book of that entire poem. Milton writes Paradise Lost in many ways to answer the very question that Emily obviously is resurrecting here. Now, yes, Emily knew her Milton, and she understood the argument that, of course, of man's first disobedience and the fruit of that forbidden tree brought death into the world and all our woe. Notice the word woe and then the word oh. I think Emily is maybe channeling a little bit of Milton when she writes this poem, no doubt. Finally, at 3b, how are you going to own a poem like this? How do you deal with the death, the tragic death of a child? And what is your theodicy? How do you answer the question that there is pain and suffering in the world? Is it of some value? We have commented that Emily's fundamental theodictic view is much like Walt Whitman's, much like Emerson and Thoreau's. When bad things happen, don't ask, why did it happen to me, but rather, for me. It's not that we're celebrating, for example, the death of a child, but rather, is there anything that can be learned from that experience that can be informative? I'm hopeful that can be the case as well for your study of Emily. Thank you.